Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of Bayou Bengal Bites, our weekly rundown of all things LSU sports. Of course, it's been very baseball heavy lately, with the Tigers taking home their seventh national championship. Thank you, Tyler, for holding it down last week in our reaction show. I hate that I had to miss it, but duty calls for work. But I guess you could call this the off season. Not a whole lot of sports going on right now. We're gonna try to keep these going every week if we can find enough headlines. But Tyler, it's a great time to be a Tiger fan with big fall coming up ahead.
Yeah, definitely a big fall coming up ahead. It's pretty much the off season for all sports fans, except we have the MLB going on. We actually had the LSU SEC Network takeover, so that's what I've been watching, and they have
Yep.
a really good triple header coming up. Well, they'll be replaying, the LSU versus Florida game 3, LSU versus Iowa national championship, and to cap it off, you got the LSU versus Alabama game, which was one of the best college football games of the year. So it's definitely, this is definitely the day to watch all your sports until we get it in August in September, whenever the football team takes the field.
Yeah, and if you want more of your sports fix, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and
Yeah.
get all sports there, and especially LSU and SEC based sports. So let's get right on into it. So over in the women's golf news, LSU has started to become a premier golf team in the women's landscape, and we've got Aine Donegan, who is currently competing in the U.S. Open I believe it's her first professional tournament, and something a little interesting. She's from Ireland, took a 30-hour flight over to Pebble Beach, got there Sunday morning at 4 a.m. And guess what wasn't there with her? Was her bags, and
Mm.
more importantly, her golf bag was not there. So she had no golf clubs to start potentially the biggest golf tournament of her life. Well, she plays a practice round with a set of pings, and on Tuesday, United Airlines, I believe is who the culprit was, sends her bags, and they're all snapped in half. She has no driver, no 3-wood. Her wedges are broken, so gotta be, I mean, devastating, right? Well, she gets a loaner set of pings. She's out there tied 6 for the field, shooting 3 open. So we're wishing you luck, Amy. I believe I'm saying her name right. It's got a little asterisk there on it. But we're wishing you luck, and we hope for great success going forward. Tyler, I don't know about you, but if I showed up to Pebble Beach and my clubs were snapped in half, I'd be devastated.
Yeah, I'd be devastated too. I'm feeling like a lot of people are going through a lot of airline troubles too, especially on United this year. So hopefully they can get their act together and this doesn't happen again. But for your clubs and your bag to not show up in the biggest tournament of your life is definitely not what you want. So
Yeah, for sure.
we're definitely going to be rooting for her, though. Rooting for our former Tigers. We know we like to always talk about Sam Burns, but it's nice, to see some former Lady Tigers also take part in the LPGA Tour as well.
Yeah, and actually, Annie's still at LSU. She's a junior, so
Yeah,
she's keeping her
she's
amateur
an amateur
status, and she'll
right
be
now.
competing for the Tigers when the collegiate season starts back up. So, going from amateur Tigers, let's go to some that are about to hear their names called in the pros. So the 2023 MLB Draft is coming up on Sunday, July 9th. But I don't know what time it starts. It goes on forever. There's a lot of rounds. I think they've shortened it in the past, haven't they? The past couple of
Yeah,
years,
it's
they've
now down to
mentioned
20
it's
rounds. It used to be like
oh,
40. So
20 rounds.
I think it's only rounds 1 and 2 in night number 1. Jay Johnson will actually be on this in the
I
studio
saw that.
with that. He'll be maybe seeing at least 3 of his former Tigers go in the first round, especially with the recent mock draft having Floyd going to the Braves at 24.
Yeah, I saw one mock draft this morning that had Wyatt Langford going first to the Pirates, and I was like, all right, these people are just trying to write headlines at this
Yeah.
point. I mean, I know we're biased. Paul Skeens, Dylan Cruz, one of them is going to go one of them is going to go two, in my opinion. But I think now everybody's known that for the entire baseball season. They had a high schooler listed as number one, and that I see the potential of that happening because they could probably offer him less money if the
Hmm.
Pirates don't want to spend a lot of money on Cruz or Skeens. But if it's not a high schooler, I don't think it's going to be Wyatt Langford. No offense to Wyatt, he was a great player. He gave us a lot of heartache or heartburn in the College World Series, but I think it's going to be Cruz or Skeens. So who do you got 1 and 2, Tyler?
Yeah,
Go
I
through those
think
names.
that this has been a whole debate on our show. I feel like I put out so many videos on this topic, and I'm ready for it get their names called and see who's going where. I do think that Wyatt Langford will be a top 3 pick, but since we're an LSU show, we're going to stick with our guys. I still think like at the start of the season, I would have for sure said Dylan Cruz, but Paul Skeens had one of the best pitching seasons I've ever seen in college baseball. 209 strikeouts, breaking Big McDonald's record that hasn't been touched for 30 plus years. And like,
which
if
is
you see his
insane.
velocity going from Air Force to now, like last season, he was like hitting 93, 92, and now he can hit up to 102. And his breaking ball is just absolutely filthy. So I think that ultimately,
fall
whatever
off the table.
yeah, it's fall off the table stuff. So I think whatever happens, though, he will get shut down since he did have ate up so many innings. I know that we had the talks about the Pirates being the playoffs discussion, but they seem to be cooling off. I think that they're going to be passed up by the Reds and the Brewers, so they'll ultimately be out of the playoff discussion. So I think if the Pirates end up taking Paul Skeens, I think they're just going to shut him down, and we'll see him back on the field next year somewhere in the minor leagues. So I think that the Pittsburgh Pirates, I know, like you just mentioned, maybe there's a possibility that they can save up some money, but Paul Skeens is just a generational talent that their front offense would look like complete fools if they didn't take. So I think that Paul Skeens go 1, and then Dylan Cruz will end up with the Washington Nationals. Washington Nationals, they've been sellers. A couple of years ago in 2019, their World Series team, we saw Trey Turner, Bryce Harper. That was the season that he left. Before that, we saw Juan Soto. None of those guys are on the team anymore. So I think that this is going to be a Nationals ball club that's going to want some hitting power. And Dylan Cruz is a 5-tool player. He can do it on the base path. He can do it in the field. He's one of the best defensive center fielders in the country. And then we saw him at the plate at his 3 years. He just got consistently better and better and better. So I think it's also going to be Skeens 1, Cruz at 2.
Okay, I like it. A big concern from a lot of people when Omaha was happening was, they're pitching Paul Skeens too much. There goes Tommy John surgery. You got to think people. One, it's the College World Series. Skeens wasn't coming off the mound, and two, he hasn't been a starting pitcher since at like how a lot of these other guys are starting pitchers, like all the way from like little league, junior high. He was a catcher and a closer for the majority of the time at Air Force, and I don't even think he pitched in high school. So the amount of hours you could say on his arm is a lot less. So I don't think that's a huge concern. And then he had a fairly documented rest program and what he went through at LSU, and of course when he goes to the major leagues. I mean, fingers crossed. No sort of Tommy John surgery. You hate that to see that for any pitcher, but I would think it'd be less likely for someone like Paul Skeens. I've got a few other guys written down that are most likely to be draft eligible. I went through the roster before the show to try to get an idea of what we're going to look like next season. Third guy on the list is Ty Floyd. Made himself some money in Omaha. Tyler, do you see him staying in the first round or slipping?
Yeah, I definitely think that he could definitely sneak into the first round, and if not, he's going to be in the compensatory picks. They have, in the first round, they have all 30 of the MLB teams, and then they have a couple of extra picks to really cap off round number 1. But like I mentioned on the Sports Scramble, everyone wants to talk about how good Paul Skeens would, but Ty Floyd had one, really good season. He was 8-0. To end his season, it had that 17 strikeout game. And then you look at the first game in Omaha. I know that everyone wants to talk about, LSU losing that game, but Ty Floyd was also dominant in that one. Wake Forest coming into Omaha was one of the best offenses in the country. They just steamrolled over Alabama, just put up 22 runs on the Tide. So Ty Floyd, really made him some money. We saw it with last year with Oklahoma's pitcher, Cade Horton. He was able to really work his way up. And that's what's the beauty of this MLB draft. You can have, an up and down season, but once you get in Omaha, that's when you have the majority of the scouts there. And if you impress in Omaha, then you're definitely you're gonna go back to their front office and be like, hey, this guy's for real. Like, we can use a first round pick on him. So honestly, I think that the Atlanta Braves make so much sense to them. You just look at a guy like Spencer Strider, who's only in his third season in the MLB, coming from Clemson. And they were really able to, put him in as one of the elite pitchers. His velocity is a tick up. So maybe, Ty Floyd can do the same. His out pitch is that rising fastball. He was able to do that against Florida. Florida could not even hit him. I know that they had a couple of home runs, but outside of that, this man got 17 strikeouts. That does not happen.
Which is unheard of.
every once in a weekend. So I definitely think that Ty Floyd is going to get it up there. I think that he's going to land in the 20s. There's going to be some team. Pitching is always a need for an MLB team, and I think that the Braves, the way that they're set up now in the playoffs run, I could potentially see them, moving him up if the bullpen, has a key injury down the stretch. So I definitely think I can see Ty Floyd sneaking in the first round.
I like it. I like it. I mean, you mentioned this is a team that had the likes of Paul Skeens, Dylan Cruz, Tommy White. You forget about Ty Floyd. If Paul Skeens
Hmm.
isn't on this team, Ty Floyd's your ace, your Friday night guy every week. And his fastball, it hung around 94, 95 majority of the season, but there towards the end, he was touching 98,
I think it's going to
97,
keep picking
98. I
up.
think the adrenaline might have helped that out a
Yeah.
little bit, but you get with a pro coach, and I could see him catching a couple more miles an hour. Other players we've got. This one's been a hot topic. Trey Morgan. Do you draft him as a first baseman? Do you draft him as an outfielder? My personal opinion is he might not have the power that your typical big league first baseman has, but he hits for contact. He's a consistent hitter, and his athleticism at first base is unmatched. I've never seen anything like it. But then he proved himself in the outfield, playing left field for half the season for the Tigers. He was making ballerina-like catches. So I think whoever gets him, you've got a utility player to say the least. You can put him anywhere.
Yeah, at least you have a utility player that can play both left field at first base. But to be honest with you, I could see this, if he gets up into the big leagues, he's could be one of the best defensive first basemen. I know that we see in the big leagues, 6'4", 6'5" is pretty much
Right.
the prototype to be a first baseman. But if you have seen Trey Morgan, he is one of the elite defensive first basemen. He's showed some elite catches in the outfield too. So he's shown that can he also play outfield, but I just feel like his natural born position has been the first base. I know that you said that he has, not the power of a major leaguer, but he has some sneaky power. He had 9 home
Right.
runs this year. He had a couple of home runs last year. So it's not like that double digit power, that we see guys like Hayden Travinsky and all those, Gavin Dugas year in year out did for the Tigers. But I think that Trey Morgan is just a consistent hitter. He sprays it everywhere in the field. And, if they play a shift, he can hit it the opposite way. And that's exactly what you
Right.
want for this type of hitter. So I think that Trey Morgan is probably not going to be a first rounder, but I could see him go in the third round.
Yeah, I think wherever he goes, he's a steal for a team because he's just an all-around
Yeah.
athlete. He can do pretty much anything you ask him to do. Jordan Thompson, if you would have asked me last year, I would have said he wasn't getting drafted. But minus Omaha, where he struggled a little bit, majority of the season, he batted well over 300 until the very end. And then defensive wise, it was a completely different person out there than it was in 2022. Do you see Thompson getting drafted this year?
Yeah, I think I do. I think that his defense vastly improved from last year. Last year, I think that, the move going from third base to shortstop, it was just a year that he needed to improve. So this year going though, I mean, he just made Sports Center top 10 plays. The play that I just go back to is the Kentucky series where he did
Right.
a Derek Jeter s type play. He had some really good plays in Omaha. I'm not even going to count those 2 errors in Florida. That whole entire game was just a disaster for the team, but he was able to bounce back, and step up big for a couple of RBI singles to get the Tigers going and game number 3. So, he's not really an elite offense, but I just feel like this guy, whenever there's guys on base, he's just a clutch hitter. We saw it in the regular season against Tennessee. We saw it against Georgia. So I definitely think that his defense alone is going to get him to the big leagues as a shortstop. So I think that there's going to be a team out there that'll get him. I would say at least I would say probably the 5th round or 6th round. That's his area for him to get drafted.
Okay. I like it. And I think if you're getting drafted in the top 10 rounds out of any of these guys, you're probably going to the MLB. I mean, of course, Morgan and I believe Thompson also, they can all return if they don't like where they're taking it. I think Ty Floyd is also only just a junior, so he has the potential to come back next season. Someone who we didn't get to see this year, and it really hurt the bullpen or hurt our pitching staff that we thought, but turns out they were okay, was Grant Taylor. He had Tommy John surgery before the beginning of the season. But I'm seeing him in some pre-draft mock drafts going a little later in the rounds if the team wants to take a chance on him with his recovery. If you're Grant Taylor, Tyler, are you taking that draft or are you returning back to school?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. A guy coming off of Tommy John surgery, you just don't know what you're going to get. And it was definitely, this is where the injuries really started in the preseason. We saw guys like Chase Shores and Garrett Edwards go down, but honestly, he would have been the Sunday starter if he didn't get started. He
Right.
was that good. I think that, Jay Johnson really raved about him. He was one of the best pitchers in fall camp leading up to the season. So he had a lot of hype. And then, he got injured, whenever the calendar turned to 2023. So it was just a devastating injury to happen to him. Personally, yeah, I just think that I don't know if the MLB team is going to take the chance on him because Tommy John usually takes up a year of recovery until you're back.
Right.
And you don't know if you're going to be the same or you're going to be better or you're going to be worse than what you were before the surgery. So I think that Grant Taylor ultimately will come back. I definitely think that he definitely has the intangibles. If he didn't get hurt, he was going to be a first round draft pick, and that's no questions
Right.
asked. I think that Ty, you would have had three guys in the starting rotation be first round picks. Ty Floyd, Paul Skeens, and then Grant Taylor. So ultimately, think that a teams will ultimately pass him up, or maybe he gets taken in the later rounds and doesn't really want to take that type of money. So I think that we'll ultimately see Grant Taylor back on campus, and he's going to continue his recovery to hopefully return to the field next season.
Yeah, if I'm Grant Taylor, I think I'm betting on myself and
Mm-hmm.
coming back and trying to get back in those top rounds. And you mentioned someone like Garrett Edwards. I didn't know this, but he's also draft eligible, but I can't see him being drafted, especially with the Tommy John happening um, you know, into it and the first couple months of the season. He won't I'd be surprised if he pitched next year for the Tigers, to be honest with you. Depending on how that recovery goes. So those are all my players that I think are they're probably going to be drafted. Grant Taylor being at the bottom of that list. Some possible other guys who are all draft eligible. We've got Gavin Dugas and Braden Jobert. Both Dugas being your fifth year senior, he's done. He's either go to the draft, go play somewhere. I think a team could take him in the later rounds just because he's a very good fielder and he's got some pop to his bat. Um, with the eye issues, I mean, they may see that as a risk because I think he has to go to the eye doctor like once every 2 months to get his eyes checked again, and he might require future surgery down the line. I don't know if a team's going to want to take that risk on, but I think it's a good late round draft pick. Brain Joe Bear just has a beautiful swing. I mean, it looks like
Mm-hmm.
Ken Griffey Jr. out there. I don't know how, as a team, you don't see that. He can play in the field. He hits for power. How you don't draft him. So what I wanted to ask you, Riley Cooper. He's a junior. He's eligible to go. Do you think he gets drafted this go around?
I definitely think that he's another guy that could have made some money in Omaha. He like throughout the whole entire postseason, going to the regionals all the way to Omaha, he was LSU's best reliever. So ultimately, I think it's going to be tough for him to pass up. I think that there's definitely going to be a team that wants him. And I think that Braden Joe Bear is going to go in the early rounds too. Like you mentioned, we saw him whenever he's on in the game, he can be on. And, we
Right.
saw it in the first game against Tennessee, and then we saw it in game 3 against Florida. He has a really pure swing. His defense was a little bit shaky at the start of the season, but down the season, he really made some really good plays that could have possibly ended or saved LSU season. So I think that there's going to be a lot of talent on this roster. This was a talented roster, and it would not surprise me if we see several of these guys, take the MLB money and go to the next level because that was ultimately their goal. You want to go to LSU, get better, and we saw like Dylan Cruz, like he keeps telling us, he to high school, but ultimately I think that high schoolers just need to go to college. I just feel like
I agree with you.
I just don't see many like high school guys get to the MLB like that quick. I feel like more than not, it go guys who go to college for 3 years, they're like in the major leagues like that because they're just so used to it, and especially in the conference like the SEC.
No, and I agree with you on that point. Two guys to round out the list, Alex Milazzo and Hayden Trubisky, both our star catchers, kind of ended the season with injuries. Trubisky had a nagging injury. And in the last game, Alex Milazzo fractures his shin. Both injuries, from what I've seen, are they don't require surgery. Rest for a couple weeks, stay off your feet. You should be good to go. Um, and with these two guys, if they get picked in the later round, it's interesting to see if they take the money or if they come back to college because you got to think But NIL plays a much bigger factor in college baseball than it does the NFL or college football, just based on that money that you're getting from the major league teams. Of course, you got to spend a couple of years in the minors. You don't get paid very well during that, and you hear a lot about guys just kind of burn out and flame out because they can't afford to continue to play baseball. So Milazzo or Stravinsky, do you think they get drafted this round?
I don't think so. I think that they could definitely have another year under the belt. Milazzo, he suffered injury, but it's not going to be an injury that's going to keep him out
Right.
of the 2024 season. So I think that both of them will come back, and the catcher room is going to be really good. You'll have Travinsky, Brady Neal. That's a guy who no one really wants to talk about. He really looked good, and then he suffered injury, and then we saw
Right.
the emergence of Travinsky getting hot, and then we saw Milazzo really finish off the deal in Omaha. So I expect both of those guys to be back too.
Okay, well, let us know your picks in the comment section. Who you got going 1 and 2? I think we know who the options are, and where you see some of these other Tigers shaping out. So, shifting gears over to the gridiron, we're starting a new little preview series before the season starts. We're going to go through each position group if we have enough weeks. I don't know that we do. We might have to combine a few. We're going to start with the QB room. Introduce you to your QBs. You got Jaden Daniels, Garrett Nussmeier, and third stringer freshman Ricky Collins. All signs point to Jaden Daniels being the starter. I don't know if Brian Kelly has come out and said it, but a 99% chance it's going to be Daniels again this year based on the improvement that we've seen. But I could see Garrett Nussmeier, being thrown into some game situations. He's the gunslinger. You saw against Georgia. He came out and threw for 298 yards in the second half. Now, granted, that game was kind of already away from LSU, so Georgia might have been resting some of their starters. But he's a phenomenal quarterback, and I think he knows his role. I watched an interview from the Manning Passing Academy, but from Daniels, saying him and Nussmeier, I think he might have called him Nussbus, are best friends. I mean, there's no animosity there. They just want each other to both succeed, and that's what you want from a quarterback room. You want everybody to build each other up and just do what's best for the team. Granted, Daniels is going to be the starter, but I wouldn't be surprised if Nussmeier sees the field, and I think he knows in returning this year, next season, it's his team. It's his keys to the kingdom for him to lose. So, Tyler, preview the QB room. I mean, people are saying it's potentially the best QB room in the country. What are your thoughts on LSU's QB room?
Yeah, Jane Daniels said that quote in the Manning Passing Academy. It's not bold, but I like it. Joe Burrow
Yep.
went bold back in 2019, the Manning Passing Academy, and ultimately worked. He said that they were going to be the best offense in the country. It ultimately worked. So we will see if Jane Daniels can do the same. I definitely think that Jane Daniels, we saw him in the spring game. He looked phenomenal to end off the season against Purdue. We saw both quarterbacks take the field. I don't think it's going to be like that in every game, but if it gets to a blowout, which there won't be many games this season, especially game number one against a Florida State team that's going to be a national championship contender too. So I think that Jane Daniels, he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the country. I think that he's going to be in the Heisman discussion right up there with Caleb Williams.
Plus 1,100 odds right now. I think he's the best SEC quarterback odds to win the Heisman.
Yeah, and then Garrett Nussmeier, I feel like that's a fan favorite. I feel like every time he steps in, he's just gunslinging it. We've seen times though that he's just too gunslinging. In the Southern game, he had too many interceptions. So I think that in the offseason, he's definitely worked on that. In the Manning Passing Academy, that they had this little scrimmage here. They had both quarterbacks, all these quarterbacks. See how far that they can throw the ball. And Jaden Daniels had a beautiful pass, and the wide receiver dropped it. So that made
Scrubs down there in Nicholls State, Tyler. You got to get your boys ready to go.
And then Garrett Nussmeier, he just showed off his arm too. And then you also mentioned Ricky Collins. He had some struggles in the spring game, but I'm really concerned about that. His freshman season. He's going to take some time. He's going to learn under some really good quarterbacks. So I think that it's going to be Jaden Daniels' team, and then after that, heading into the 2024 season, which Brian Kelly thinks that's the national championship year. Which, after
I didn't love that comment.
I saw that comment too, but
I didn't love that comment.
I think that he feels a little bit of pressure after Jay Johnson and Kim Mulkey won in here too. So I think that he may be saying that just to save himself if he ultimately doesn't win the title this season. But I agree with Jaden Daniels. I think that not only in the SEC, but also in the country, I think that this LSU quarterback room could compete with anybody.
Yeah, I mean, you look around the country, of course, I think top quarterback rooms. You look at USC, you have Caleb Williams, who's
Everybody wants
returning
to
off
talk
his.
about Texas, but I mean that's just the
Yeah,
star
I don't
power.
see it in Texas. I think Arch Manning's just the name, if I'm being completely honest. I from what I've seen, it's the spring game. You can't say too much, but Quinn Ewers, I think, is going to be starting for that Texas job, and I don't know about Arch Manning. I'm not sold on him yet. But you look at USC with Caleb Williams coming off his Heisman winning season, I would say they're probably the top quarterback room in the country, right? And then you got guys like Drake May at North Carolina, also a good argument. But looking around the SEC, I would say LSU has the best starting quarterback, if not backup quarterback, that in the group. Of course, depth wise, you got three guys that can all start. You hope Ricky Collins doesn't have to see the field. That means the other two either sucked or are injured. But you look at a team like Ole Miss, it's got Jackson Dart, brought in Walker Howard, and of course Spencer Sanders, who's most likely going to be the starter. Brought him in over from Oklahoma State. I wrote down some statistics, Tyler, that I'm going to read them off to you. My top four SEC quarterbacks are Jane Daniels, Spencer Rattler, Spencer Sanders, and KJ Jefferson in no particular order. Just reading them off here. Last season, Rattler had the most passing yards at 3,026, followed closely by Jane Daniels at 2,913. And then Sanders and Jefferson were down in that 2,600 range. So passing wise, yes, offenses are run different, but Daniels still at the top of that category. Touchdowns, KJ Jefferson ran away with this one at 24 touchdowns, but that Arkansas really fell off towards the halfway point of the
Mhm.
season. And you got Spencer Rattler at 18 and Daniels and Sanders at 17. The interesting statistic, though, and a lot of people hate on Daniels' decision making, but he's lowest out of these four quarterbacks with interceptions turned. He's only at 3, where Rattler's at 12, Sanders is at 9, and KJ Jefferson is at 5. So not a huge difference there. But I think in the offseason, Daniels has made strides in his progressions. He doesn't take off and run. At least that's what we're being told from individuals close to the team. So I'm excited to see what happens in this Florida State game. First play last year, he gets blitzed. He took off running down the field. It was like, okay, this is awesome. But then, as Tiger fans know, it became a little bit of a headache that he would just take off and run whenever he didn't have an open wide receiver. And the mentioned running, he led all categories between these four quarterbacks: 885 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns. Second closest was KJ Jefferson at 640 and 9 touchdowns, which I think a lot of those were goal line touchdowns, considering he's like 6'10", not that tall, but he's a big dude, right? So I think from an SEC standpoint, LSU's got the best quarterback in the conference. Do you agree with me, or you think somebody else stands out?
Yeah, I definitely think that Jane Daniels. I think that I've seen lists, KJ Jefferson being number one. But I just feel like Jane Daniels just has all the tools that I
Right.
think that he's going to make a jump that Joe Burrow did. I don't think that he's going to be the number one overall pick, but I could see him jump all the way into the first round. I think right now he would be a third round, projection in the NFL. But I just think that he's just due for. I mean, he's not. It's not like he's coming off of a bad year, folks. And you just mentioned
Yeah,
three
he's coming off a
interceptions. That's pretty good.
phenomenal year.
I
Yeah,
feel like whenever there's just like not anything open, he took off and run. It's not really a bad thing. He has elite level speed. I'm curious to see what his 40 time is going to be whenever he takes part in all the the NFL combine and all that. It's got to be like a 4.4 at least.
right.
So I definitely think with SEC way you look at it, Bryce Young's no longer there. Stetson Bennett's no longer there. So that really just leaves Spencer Rattler, which I'm not really been a big fan on. KJ Jefferson, I think that people have compared him to a Cam Newton type of build, and I definitely see whenever Arkansas is on the money, KJ Jefferson's really the main reason why they're so good. And then Will Rogers also has been good, but it's going to be a different offense this year. So I think that the SEC quarterbacks is wide open. Georgia also Carson Beck. We've seen him get some hype. Joe Milton, with his elite pass throwing as well. So maybe he makes that step that Anthony Richardson did last season. So I think that the SEC quarterbacks, Devin Leary at Kentucky. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say it. Jane Daniels is the best SEC quarterback going into the season.
Book it. Jade Daniels to win the Heisman plus 1,100 odds. Go ahead and cash it out. So I mean, we're LSU biased, obviously, but I mean, I read the statistics to you. Jade Daniels had one of the better seasons last year. And it reminds me a lot of a Joe Burrow in 2018. Had a pretty good year. Led the Tigers to some big wins, and let's see him take that leap going forward. Well, I don't think we'll ever get another Joe Burrow, but I think Jaden Daniels has the potential to do something special in this upcoming season. So next week, I think we're going to go into the running backs, and then we'll mention their very talented wide receiver room that's going to help Jaden win the Heisman this year. So let's get to our last topic. So with the departure of Wes Johnson to be the Georgia baseball head coach, Jay Johnson had his hands full. Well, he went to a familiar friend, Nate Yeski, who coached with him at Arizona, and most recently was the pitching coach at Texas A&M. And A&M had a very good pitching staff this year. Last year it was phenomenal. Brought him to the College World Series semifinals. So Tyler, you like the hire? You feel good about it?
Yeah, I definitely think he has been everywhere. He's been at Arizona, has been in Oregon State when they had some elite pitchers. That was the 2017 season, so LSU was able to get a taste of that, and then he would go on to Texas A&M. I think that Jay Johnson wanted to get him, but I think that Nate Yeski already signed the contract, so it would have been an awkward situation. But
Right.
whenever Wes Johnson, I just felt like that he was going to go back to his old friend and Nate Yeski. He's also one of the best pitching coaches as well. So I feel like, if we went from Jason Kelly to Wes Johnson and now to Nate Yeski, I feel like there hasn't really been much of a drop off. So you're definitely
No,
going
I
to
agree
be
with you.
losing a couple of key pitchers. So it's definitely going to be a huge offseason. We see Tennessee's Chase Burns in the transfer portal. There's been some LSU smoke around his name. So I think that, Nate Yeski and Jay Johnson will collab together and, rebuild this pitching staff through the transfer portal like they did going into last season.
I'm with you on that one. Last point, around town news. I want to give congratulations to someone who's won a lot of awards already. Mr. Dylan Cruz wins SEC Male Player of the Year. Tyler,
Not
last
surprised.
LSU player to win the Male Player of the Year. Do you know who it was?
I'm not sure.
Joe Burrow.
Oh,
So a
Joe
very
Burrow.
good,
I was
very
thinking that, but I feel like that was too easy of an answer.
nope. It was Joe Burrow last player. So congratulations to Dylan
From
Cruz.
one
Very
goat to
good
the
company to
next.
be in. Exactly, great company to be in. So that wraps up this week's episode of Bayou Bengal Bites. Let us know what you thought about the QB room, if they're going to be the top dogs in the country, and we're looking forward to breaking it down each week. We'll eventually get some game previews and get ready for the season. So Tyler, it's been a pleasure. Go Tigers.